And none of this would be happening whatsoever without Mark Rogers, voice of college football. So I'm really excited to bring him on for the first time in a while on Michigan Live. Mark, it's good to have you back on.
Great to see both of you guys, definitely. And I would like to respond to the comment that was made about this being the best Michigan show on YouTube. I will say it this way, that I never claimed to have much talent, but I think I'm a heck of a talent evaluator. I'll put it that way.
Very true. Very true, Mark. Yeah, and to John's point, we are not here without you. So thank you very much for that. But question, Mark, when was the last time you were on here? The spring game last year?
Oh, dang.
I think it was. That's a year. All right, we got to change that. We got to change that. You got to come on more than that.
Yeah, Door, Door is all you've got. Like you could just pop in one day if randomly if you wanted to.
No, we got to do more. Yeah, that's crazy though. I was just thinking about that because it has been a year.
Yeah, what was the setup for the spring game last year? Certainly wasn't as elaborate as you guys put together this year. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was a good time. Next year's gonna be even better though. We're gonna do it even bigger next year, so we'll have a good time with that.
Yeah, we've started a new tradition. I feel like
it was awesome. To Ann Arbor. It was awesome to behold. I enjoyed it.
Well, Mark, obviously you're always welcome here, but I know that you came for a specific reason because you wrote a book, and I have been telling everybody go to an Amazon near you since it came out. And recommend everybody read it. Let us know in chat if you've picked up your copy yet. I know that there are some in chat who have, because I know who I could kind of see some of the people, and I know that they bought the book, so let us know. But obviously, writing this, you've had all of these years in sportscasting, and then obviously voice of college football, building this network up. I mean, has Disputed National Champions been something that you've kind of been tossing around for a while? And like, what was kind of the inspiration behind putting this out?
Well, this probably won't surprise either one of you or certain people in the chat possibly that watch me on a regular basis. But like, I was the guy that wrote a 10,000 word term paper when I was 16 years old on why college football should have a 16-team playoff. And that's way before you heard anybody talking about a college football playoff. I was the guy that was writing like pro football previews that were, this thick when I was, 15, 16 years old. So this was always up my alley in regards to my interests. And, to take it back, before you two were watching Michigan football and a number of people in the chat, just think about a day and age when you would watch all the big bowl games on New Year's Day. And at the end of the night, you'd watch the Sugar Bowl, Orange Bowl. They were pretty much on at the same time. And you went to bed and you thought you knew who the national champion was, but you didn't know for sure. Now, how crazy is that? It's not like you watched the Super Bowl and were like, oh, well, we know who the champion is. Like, you'd go to bed and you didn't know for sure who the champion was, but you would have to wait until you got the paper the next day and saw, oh, the AP writers said it was Nebraska and the coaches say it was Michigan. Well, I got that flipped, I believe. But yeah, that was the outcome. How crazy is that? So I always questioned that. When I first became a college football fan, like 8, 9 years old, the first thing that seemed odd to me is you'd watch these games on New Year's Day and you'd be like, why is number 1 playing number 8 and number 2's playing number 5 and 3's playing like 17? Yeah. And then, it didn't take me long to get into it and be like, okay, I get it. They're related to the conferences and they got bowl tie-ins. So I get it. And that's kind of cool that, the SEC champ's always going to go to the Sugar Bowl and the Big Ten champ and the Pac-10 champ are going to be in the Rose Bowls. But sometimes it just didn't make sense. Like, you'd have this 11-0 team playing an 8-3 team, and you'd be like, well, I wish those two teams would play instead.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is we didn't like in those times before the BCS, it was just normal. It was normal, right? So you wouldn't know, to your point, who is the true national championship, but it was accepted because it was just what it was. And then obviously as it progressed through time, they entered the BCS, which we're going to kind of get into here, Mark, is like the question becomes, was Michigan and Nebraska the cause for the BCS change, or was it one of the motivating factors to why FBS went into the BCS? What are your thoughts there on that and the Michigan-Nebraska matchup?
Well, one of the reasons I chose the 1990s is that, number one, I just figured my target audience was probably nostalgic for the 1990s. Number one, the 80s might be a little bit too beyond their reach, possibly. And so I just thought, yeah, guys that are in their 40s, let's say, would be nostalgic for the 1990s. But more principled than that, I chose the 1990s because that was the most formative decade in the history of college football in determining a champion. Because when you think about it, the AP poll was established in 1936. From 1936 into the 1990s, nothing changed.
Right.
Absolutely nothing changed. They just voted for the national champion after the bowl games. And there was this strange switch, like in the late 60s, early 70s, where this mindset changed among the writers, where they considered bowl games like exhibition games for most of that time. And they wouldn't even consider it a lot of times. And Michigan fans will be happy to know that I think it's ridiculous. Ohio State claims the national championship in 1970 and they lost the Rose Bowl. So, but then there was this flip to almost the exact opposite mindset once they got into the 70s, where the bowl games were almost like playoff games, where you couldn't win a national championship and have just lost a bowl game. Where I would argue that if it's just a data point and it's just another really good team that you played, you could be undefeated, lose a bowl game and be 11-1 and have just as valid of a claim as somebody else who was 11-1. So all of that changed going into the 1990s, where they came up with this bowl alliance and bowl coalition, where they said, okay, we're going to put number one and we're going to have all these conference affiliations stay the same, unless it can be corrected by a 1-2 matchup. And then we'll move somebody that's supposed to play over here to play 1 versus 2. But the Big Ten being the Big Ten and a bit stubborn, and the Pac-10 having the alliance with the Big Ten, they were the two that said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to play in the Rose Bowl like we always have. So it took another 6-7 years to get those two on board for the BCS in 98. But to answer your question, it's almost just ironic that Nebraska and Michigan were the final two teams to share a national championship. And there's another thing that I don't agree with detractors of either school, and especially Michigan, that they won a half national championship. I don't see it that way. They won the national championship. They just did not get an opportunity to play. So both of those teams won a national championship in 1997. They just didn't get the opportunity to play the game that everyone wanted to see. But the BCS was already set up, and there was already impetus for the BCS, and that was already set up for the next season. Really, people point to 1991 when Washington and Miami went undefeated and did not play in the postseason and split a national championship as being the one that people thought, okay, 1 and 2 have to play. Let's get this settled.
Yeah, I hate the argument that, oh, it's a split national championship. Like, you want to fault the programs for a structure that they have. There's nothing they can do about it. The system was what it was, and the results are what they are. Like, it's if you would, I guarantee you ask either player on either side of Nebraska or Michigan if they could go against each other and determine a national championship, every single one of them would say they would. It's just, it is what it is. It was a circumstance of the times and the rules back then. So yeah, I just hate that argument. I think it's what it really is, though, Mark, is it's what rival fans use to get a dig at the other, typically, right? That's what, because and it's not that Ohio State doesn't have any split national championships, because they do, but typically the 97 one's the big one that everyone talks about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in case anybody's got the book and they're following along, we're on Manning and Leaf Not Needed, Chapter 9, because neither one of those quarterbacks made it to the final, either number 1 or number 2, wherever you were.
I went with a little spin there, John, because those were the 2 top players selected in the NFL draft, and they lost the games to the 2 national championship teams in their bowl games.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And GT is mentioning something that's in the book. So GT talking about Nebraska needing a miracle play to beat a bad Missouri team. Well, Mark addresses that. And so each chapter kind of is structured with, I really like the fact that there's not a lot of fluff. You go from preseason, you have the poll, then you focus mostly on the two in dispute, right, for the season. I mean, yeah, other teams are mentioned, but like you don't go into who Bowling Green faced a lot in the it's basically, okay, Michigan did this, Nebraska did this. And so to GT's point, Nebraska did need that play to beat Missouri that season, but you could say that they obviously came on quite strong in the end there with that Tennessee matchup. So I guess my question really here is that you've projected, right, some things, and I agree with you on the BCS championship. That's the no duh one, right?
Sure.
Like Michigan versus Nebraska. I would have loved to see that play out on a neutral site and to just let them play all out. Whoever wins. That would have been really nice to see. But the playoff projection, I think a lot of Michigan, a lot of our community would be very interested to hear the logic, and I really am curious on this. So you have Florida State beating Michigan 27-24. The Nebraska one's, I believe, the same. And then Nebraska actually beating Florida State to win the whole thing. That's a very interesting. So walk me through some of that and like how Florida State was doing that year and kind of what went into that.
So I completely understand why you're pinpointing that. Obviously, Michigan won a national championship, and I'm giving some kind of projection that they would have lost to Florida State in a 1-4 matchup by a field goal. If you really look at the book, and I'll explain why I even put that in there, this book is about nothing of my opinion, except for that. That is the only thing. These Final Four projections is the rest of it is completely factual. Like, this is what happened. This is how I've interpreted it, but it's all based on facts and results on the field. And then the fun part of the book was, there was no Big Ten championship game back then. The fun part was going through all these conferences and saying this would have been the Big Ten championship game. It would have been Michigan and Nebraska. Well, I've got two sets of lineups there. I go with what would have been the Big Ten championship game that particular year. It would have been Ohio State and Michigan would have played a rematch. But if the teams that are in the Big Ten now and the same season would have played out, it would have been Michigan, Nebraska. So I give you both looks. And that's what's fascinating to me is reworking history in a different context. But to get to your question, so in the midst of writing this book, my intent was not to say this team would have won a national championship. This team would have won that game. This team, I don't interject my opinion. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't write a paragraph explaining why I thought Nebraska would have beat Tennessee. Well, they did play Tennessee. So I just put the exact score of the game because they did play. And then in the other seasons, what happened there is that I was in the midst while I was starting to think about this book of producing videos. And I did 1983, 84, 90, 96, 2000. I did a bunch of the controversial 97, did a bunch of the controversial seasons, and I left my opinion out of it. I just wanted to lay out, these were the resumes, these are the records, the schedules, and I just left the videos after I did like 3 or 4 of them. And all I got in the comment section was, who would have won this game? We want to hear who you thought would have won this game. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know who would have won between Michigan and Nebraska. I have no idea. I watched all the games. I watched both of them play almost every game that season. I have definite opinions about, but I think it's ridiculous to say who would have won a game between two teams that good. Now, if you would have said, who would have won between Nebraska and Northwestern, well, yeah, sure, we can assume Nebraska wins that game. But between championship caliber teams, but I got such a push on people asking me to project what would have happened. I just kind of threw that in there. And I thought Florida State was was they were just probably the most talented team in the country. They were loaded. And the interesting part of the Michigan-Nebraska debate is I think both fan bases can cling to very strong points. And for Michigan, they played a more consistent season top to bottom. They played a tougher schedule, not by a ton, but they played 7 ranked opponents. And those are and Michigan was more balanced both sides of the ball, extremely, strong both sides of the ball. That was Michigan's argument. Nebraska's argument is they came on and of course the Michigan argument is basically Nebraska got lucky. I very rarely say that like somebody got lucky. I usually say, no, they took advantage. No, Nebraska got lucky. A ball got kicked off the cleat up in the air and got caught for a touchdown to save them, because otherwise the game's over. They lost.
Michigan would win definitively at that point, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't even be close. They would have probably gotten every vote. So that's Michigan's argument. Nebraska's argument is that they played better down the stretch. Michigan's kind of quasi Big Ten championship game was against Ohio State. It was a really close game. Basically, Charles Woodson saved their butt. He was amazing. Hit a punt return for a TD, an interception, a long run.
Right.
And they slipped by Ohio State. And then their bowl game came down to the last play of the game. Ryan Leaf was chucking it in the end zone to try to pull out the win, versus Nebraska just steamrolling Peyton Manning and Tennessee. So that's the Nebraska argument, and that's the Michigan argument.
Isn't it also true? Correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm not as sharp on this argument. I haven't done this debate in a while. But doesn't Michigan have the better head-to-head on the matchups, like the common opponents? I mean, I'm sorry, the common I thought I remember Michigan having better win margins against common opponents. Is that true? I can't remember.
That is a great question, because I think they both did play Colorado. I should pull that up. I should have remembered that better.
I've seen people make that argument. I've not had this debate in a while, because at the end of the day, I'm of the position you are, Mark. Like, their national champ. Like, listen, we won the national title. Nebraska won theirs. They're just victims of the circumstances at the time.
Yeah, to me, it would be different if Michigan rolled everyone 50-0, and the other team we were talking about was like this school that just kind of popped out of nowhere. North Carolina just kind of made their way through this crazy season and they were undefeated. But, you're talking about like 2 great stacked teams from great conferences that played great football. But that common opponent question, I'm not prepared for that. I do vaguely, but I'm trying to think who they would have both played. We can pull up the schedules.
27-3 Michigan. What did Nebraska do? Let's do this live.
27-24.
24. Yes.
So there's your common opponent.
Debate over. Michigan's the greatest. Debate over.
So the only thing you said wrong there, TJ, was common opponents. Opponent.
It counts.
So yeah, they did play a better game. Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that, and I guess like back then, I mean, which out of the 2 polls, the AP and the coaches, I mean, they both have their flaws, right? And they both had. You've talked about the AP in the past and how some of the writers, they don't dive into as holistically. And obviously the coaches poll, Nebraska won by 2, right? It was 32-30. And one could argue Nebraska had a pretty successful PR campaign with Osborne retiring.
Yes, absolutely. So I don't think this is a valid argument from the standpoint of just judging the 2 football teams, but this is a valid argument in regards to the way it went down, is that Michigan going into the bowl season, they had a substantial lead in both polls. And there are a couple conspiracy theories. One would be, Nebraska did play a more impressive bowl game. And so while Michigan had a lead in both polls, somehow these magically turned out that one group of voters were like, oh, we'll be the ones to vote for Michigan. And then, the coaches poll went the Tom Osborne way. And there's also conspiracy thought out there that Philip Fulmer voted Michigan like down a few spots as well. Now, what he had against Michigan, I don't recall, but that's also
Is he a
part of
Buckeye?
the conspiracy. No.
Mm-hmm. I have to look it up now.
This will be one of those peak off-season topics that we will continue hitting every year, probably.
Yeah, somebody in the chat might know that, because that's one of those things that I've long since forgotten. Like 10
Someone
years
in the
ago that I
chat
used to
might.
know.
Absolutely.
One of those things I used to know. But you know, I don't want to hijack your show, but I will let everyone know that the fun part of this book, at least for me, because a lot of people aren't into history, and I get it, and it's not just a history book, but I really loved taking each one of these seasons, 1990 through 99, and then putting them into the BCS era, the 14 playoff era, the 12-team playoff era, to show how they would have played out and who would have made the playoffs. Because to look at some of these playoff teams, it's kind of funny to see Southern Miss would have been in the playoff, East Carolina would have been in the playoff. And even in the teams in the power conferences, it's kind of funny to look, wow, really? They would have been in the playoff.
Yeah, Fresno State is in here. That's there's some interesting ones. So yeah, I think it's also good because it's not like a super verbose book. You know, you get the bite size kind of for each piece and some rationales, but like it's you can read it without getting overwhelmed. And I think that's something that you know, less is more sometimes, and you can definitely get that. But Mark, we do actually have a few super chats that are directed in part to you, so I figure we could hit those. So Bull with the $4.99 says, I listen to a ton of Michigan podcasts and shows on YouTube. This by far hits all the topics and keeps us informed and in the know. Good job, Mark. We didn't get Bull to say that, but
well, these guys alluded to it before they brought me on. You know, we started a Michigan channel a long, long time ago, and we kind of pieced things together in a certain way, and we did a decent job. And I try to be as objective as possible. But the joke of me coming on here hosting a Michigan show every week, you know, there's a little irony there. But I did my best, and you know, I'd bring on Michigan people, and we did a decent job. But did not build the community, did not come anywhere close to diving into recruiting and the nuances of Michigan football, the university, everything that goes on there. Like these two guys right here, they have just raised it through the roof a million times over.
Thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Nick has a question for you. So I know Nick called Nick likes to call the main show, the college football show that's every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and then there's one late night one usually. So Nick was on there, but now he's asking you about your thoughts on 1984 BYU.
That's a bit of a running joke. We've got a caller that's been calling in for quite a few years that he's hung up on a video I posted in it almost seems like it was that long ago. In 2020, the video is like 5.5 years old, and I went back because he called the other day. I went back and he had left like 33 comments like in the last 2 weeks to that video. So he's still going. It just pisses him off beyond belief. So
Doreen's here. So Doreen is one of our Buckeye community members and also a mod, and Doreen is now 10 months membership. So we really appreciate that. And Mark with my favorite Wolverines next to Blue Wolverine, who no argument there. Blue Wolverine's great too.
Absolutely. And I'll say real quick about Nick. He called the other night and we talked the whole scandal And it's just great to have a reasonable discussion with somebody, not agree on everything, but we probably agreed on 90%. And we went back and forth. And I think he appreciates that I can say this, a lot of this is ridiculous and so forth. And Michigan won a national championship, and he can certainly understand my points on where I think there's certain validity to the investigation and so forth. And we have a great discussion.
Yeah. He's a definitely a knowledgeable caller, and he he's a personality like everybody, but like he knows his football, and that's one thing you can always appreciate about him. Blue Wolverine has a super chat for us. Mark finally has the winged helmet back on the shelf. It's there. I see it.
I threw it up there just in time.
And Nebraska, the perfect. You got both of them up there for the 97 discussion.
What I love about college football fans, guys, is a couple off seasons ago, I did a live stream, and I did 1997, Michigan, Nebraska. And I went through, rush defenses versus, looked at all the great players. And do you think I had one Michigan fan come into the chat or call the show that budged at all to say there was any chance that Nebraska could win that game? And do you think I had any Nebraska fans that gave any, 1 inch of the argument to say there's a possibility Michigan could have won that game? No, every Michigan fan, no way. We don't lose that game. Every Nebraska fan, we win that game. There's no doubt about it. And that was my perfect display to say, College Football Nation, you are who I want you to be. That's who you are. You're fans. I get it.
Yeah. When you, and to this, I'm sure you're not going to be shocked about this at all, but when you run the who would win simulations on both of those teams, Michigan wins in the big house, Nebraska wins at their house, and when it's a neutral ground, it's kind of a mixed bag, and depending on the conditions you put in. So it's just one of those where you just wish that the game could be played.
No doubt.
Awesome. Mark, always good to have you on, and you know that you have ownership privilege of bouncing on literally anytime you feel like it. But it was great. It was great chatting with you. So I do want everybody to go to an Amazon near you. And I have the link right a bunch of places, and Jackson's been posting it, and Moose has been posting it, to go at $9.99. I mean, come on. And you got a nice snapshot of the 1990s and all of the disputed national championships going on in that decade. So definitely recommend everybody check it out. Mark, I don't know if you had any other things you wanted to let people know about that are coming up, or final thoughts for us?
I don't think so. We've got a call-in show on our channel just about every day, so we appreciate people stopping by for that. And otherwise, we just do our thing there, covering all of college football. But you guys are in the right place as Michigan fans, so keep it locked in with these two, and keep supporting. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Mark, for the kind words.
Thanks for coming by, Mark. And of course, Tom couldn't help himself, but throw one more out. Mark, you would look good in a Michigan ball cap brother. So that's food for thought there.
What's funny is we had a Buckeye actually mention that he thinks if there was a fan portal, Mark would be willing to hop in and become a Michigan fan. Now, I know how crazy that is because me and Mark have these conversations all the time behind the scenes, and I can't see that happening.
Yeah.
No, I'm too old and set in my ways.
Plus, you don't even like the way our jerseys and helmets look.
I really, it's iconic. So,
yeah.
Of course, I got to have a level of respect for it. But nothing looks like turning on the TV at noon on the last Saturday of November and seeing those two uniforms, whether it's the white and the blue, or it's the scarlet versus the white in Columbus, and seeing those two teams on the same field and seeing that headgear on the same field. It's just still brings just chills to my spine. especially the last 4 years, it brought chills to my spine. But beyond that, yeah, even at the beginning of the game, yes.
Just wait for this November, Mark.
Oh yeah, back at the big house.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'll share this little story that takes about 10 seconds.
Sure.
2021, obviously, that's when Michigan broke through. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning the night before. And there was, at this point, you guys have to relate to this. It didn't cross my mind that Ohio State could lose these games. You know, it did. Like every year when they go through the hype videos right at the beginning of the game, it bring me back to like the 90s, and like then I'd start to get nervous. But like during the week with the analysis and everything, I was like, and then my daughter texted me, and she texted me a weather forecast in Ann Arbor the next day, and I went, and I just had this bad feeling that I couldn't shake. Yeah. Like snow flurry, CJ Stroud, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. I don't like this. Yeah.
Well, to your credit, I do remember when you were the Michigan therapy hotline, because Steve Dace and definitely Steve, and I called in, and I after the Michigan State loss, and I was like I don't know what's going on with the team, and you know it's like same old, and you did say like, hey, anything's possible, and beating Ohio State is possible. And
I was delivering some therapy for quite some time defending Jim Harbaugh too. I was a Jim Harbaugh defender and apologist for a couple of years. Said, keep that guy. Look at what he's done. He's doing a great job there. He's fine. He's close.
Yep.
All right. Well, Mark, always great to have you on. Jackson was saying earlier, he posted the exact date of the last show, so we definitely will want to bring you on before another 365 days. Like, well, you're definitely welcome back on, and we'll have you back on for some topics for sure coming up here.
We should have you back on to preview the season. You know, your thoughts on how you think Michigan's going to do, and then the Big Ten overall.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I certainly think that 8.5's going to get blown past.
Really? All right. Ooh, there you go.
Wow.
There you go. You heard it here first.
Red alert.
Very good. All right, Mark. Thank you for coming on.
All right, guys. Thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks, Mark.